Once I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will always have a live chat on the first Friday of the month at 8 p.m. So please subscribe, click on the bell, and let's get 1,000 subscribers very soon. Gudde Moien and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if the Hittite Empire survived. Will it survive as an empire, or will they become the Hittites like the Basques? Well, you will find out very soon. The Hittite Empire is mysterious, yet we already have some very good sources about it. The Hittites were an Anatolian people who played an important role in establishing an empire centered on Hattusa in north-central Anatolia around 1600 BC. This empire reached its height during the mid-14th century BC under Suppiluliuma I, when it encompassed an area that included most of Anatolia as well as parts of the northern Levant and Upper Mesopotamia. Between the 15th and 13th century BC, the Empire of Hattusa, or the Hittite Empire, they had a conflict with Egypt. They had also conflicts with the Assyrian Empire, the Mitanni Empire, over the control for the Middle East. The Assyrians at the end, they emerged as the dominant power and annexed much of the Hittite Empire, while the rest was just totally destroyed by the Phrygian. So consider this alternate history as some type of story. I won't just say that the Hittite Empire conquers the world and that's the end. I will pick up several points, and these points, they will be used in such a way that I will make the story at least in some way coherent. Realistically speaking, it is almost impossible to make an ATL in the Bronze Age, as not all the sources are all too clear, and also many sources maybe got lost or the information was changed, destroyed, or forgotten. But without further ado, let's get this scenario done. What if the Hittites survived? The easiest point of divergence would be that the son Sanansa would marry Nefertiti and become the pharaoh, right? Sounds very plausible. Well, I tell you something, even if he became pharaoh, his father of Sanansa, would still rule over the Hittite Empire, and generals and strong parts of the Egyptian elite, they would still try to complot against Sanansa. Moreover, if he becomes a pharaoh, he won't automatically become the ruler of the Hittite Empire upon the death of his father. Also, if the Hittites won the Battle of Carthage, the sea people will still destroy them. And this is where we need to change something. Let's say the Hittites, they were better prepared against the sea people. They could beat them and kill many of them so they wouldn't come back or make a rampage in other parts. Moreover, the Hittites were very known to make good arms, and they were also known to even produce iron. So this is not really far from the truth, let's say. Of course, this will not solve other problems such as internal problems, earthquakes and droughts, and the political influence of the Hittites would diminish somewhat for some years. The coast region would be sparsely populated, walls around cities would become improved, as would defenses in general. They would then also adapt much better the iron castings, and many better weapons would be produced en masse. And military strategies, they would also be changed in many ways. I mean, the Hittites were formidable in doing this. They actually did it by borrowing and improving the chariot technology of the Mitanni Empire. So you had the horses with the chariots, and they actually improved this technology. Trade would not collapse, but not really be there in place, and we would have still a very tiny dark age, but it would end much faster, as there would be again more development between the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian Empire would also not fall, and you would have many cities that start to appear. They would have trade here and there, and thus you would not have such a long dark age. Moreover, in OTL, new Hittite states evolved above Phoenicia and around the sea, so this is not very far from the truth. Again, Phoenicia could take good advantage of it, and their position in this alternate timeline wouldn't change so much, as they would still be a trade state, and while the Hittites would slowly but surely regroup in Anatolia. The Phrygians would still come to Anatolia, but the Hittites would either beat them or integrate some of them. In the east, the Hittites would be able to expand and try to reach parts until Armenia or even beyond, as these parts would be very well known to have some iron deposits and other important resources. A continuous Hittite empire would also butterfly a lot about Assyria, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Jews, Persia, and so on. It is sure that Assyria would still expand, but I think that with the Hittite Empire still in there, Assyria would probably reach Egypt, and they would even be able to take some parts of it, but I doubt that a Neo-Babylonian Empire would exist, and thus the Jewish identity could be very minor in this ATL. Afterwards, a Persian Empire, be it from Hiram or Medes, could form an ally with the Hittites to take the Assyrians down. The Hittites would most likely expand around the coast and the border with Egypt. Conflicts with Lydia, which was part of western Anatolia, and the Greeks could also arise. Let's also assume that the Hittites would continue their policies with doing treaties, etc. Actually, half of the treaties during the Bronze Age in the Middle East were actually from the Hittites, and they would probably take advantage of some weaker Greek states, and in some wars even take chunks of Greece. Once the Persians would face troubles from revolts or wars in the east, the Hittites could invade them, and this would mean that Persian culture and influence would be weakened in general and totally replaced by the Hittite culture. With a growing population and a growing empire, Egypt would become interesting for the Hittites as a potential breadbasket, and they would manage to annex them. All of this would happen around 500 BCE. The Hittites would not be the only empire, of course. Some Persian rump empire would likely exist. It could go around Arabia. Kush would still be there, which is in the south of Egypt. Carthage, Phoenicia wasn't butterflied away. And you would also have the Etruscans, and they could become a power in Italy. At around the same time when Macedon united all of Greece against Persia, the same could happen against the Hittites, but due to the different war nature of the Hittites, I think that they might not totally just collapse and just lose few territories. It is very likely that territories such as Dacia and Illyria could fall under the control of an alternate Alexander the Great. The Danube River would be an excellent natural border, just as the Carpathian Mountains and the Alpine foothills. The next step would be Italy, and in there this alternate Alexander would take Graecia Magna or Magna Graecia, but face resistance from the Etruscans, and thus Rome would be butterflied away. The Greeks would lose any serious foothold in Italy, and Carthage could make gains as well. The Hittites would recover their losses, and as fast as the Greek expanded, they would get down due to the civil wars, rebellions, and foreign invasions. All of Greece would fall under the control of the Hittite Empire. Dacia and Illyria would become their own kingdoms, and the Etruscans would probably face wars with Carthage and later on the Celts in this alternate 3rd century BCE. The only change that the Hittites would get would be with Parthia. They too wouldn't necessarily get butterflied away. They would unite the Iranian highlands in combination with an alternate Mauryan empire and deliver a huge blow to the Hittites, who would lose Armenia, which they kept for so long. It's possible that their capital would be attacked and sacked several times, but I don't think that they would actually lose the capital, or it would not be totally destroyed. The Greeks would, in the meantime, free themselves and unite once more. I think between Carthage and the Etruscans, Carthage would most likely be the better power, but they would rather take cities and the coast, and not all of them, of course. Massilia in many parts of Iberia would fall in their hands. With the Hittites facing trouble due to Parthia, Carthage might take Egypt but not be able to hold it for a long time, and Egypt would find itself independent. The Hittites would lose almost 50% of their territories, but their colons, they would be unaffected. However, due to food shortages, their population would suffer during that century. Parthia could turn their eyes eastwards and affect the Mauryan Empire, even permanently conquer some territories. More of Indian culture could find its way in the Middle East, and slowly even in places like Anatolia, vice versa. Carthage would have a smooth expansion on the sea and have trade outposts around Africa and Brittany. Greece could become the dominant power in the Balkans, while the Etruscans would fight the Celts and the Greeks in the same time as well. Fast forward, the campaign in India would be disastrous for Parthia, and the Hittites could retake most of their former territories and shine again in old glory, while India would fall into many tinier states, Perso-Indian states, some Indo-Scythian states, and then again some truly Indian Hindu states as well. The Gauls, they could form some type of empire and force Carthage out of Massilia, and even make a border with them in the Pyrenees. The next step for the Gauls would be to conquer the Etruscans, and they would get help from the Greeks. While the Etruscans would get help from the Hittites, Carthage, they would lick their wounds and continue their maritime expansion into Cornwall. At the end, the Greeks would suffer the most. The Etruscans would have a Pyrrhic victory against Gaul, and the Hittites would be able to expand in the Balkans yet again. The next thing we would see in this alternate timeline would be the destruction of the Etruscans, and how Italy would be gobbled up by the three powers of Gaul, Carthage, and the Hittites. Monotheism would appear too. Perhaps the Egyptians would forget about the other gods and slowly and surely just focus around one principal god. The Hittites could, in order to centralize effectively, use their weather and thunder god Tarhant, who would be a resemblance with many other gods such as Zeus or Ra, for instance. Christianity would be a minor religion and compete with many more competitors, while Gaul would probably have a similar system to Hinduism, and Carthage would probably not care so much for religion altogether and become more an empire of money only. The following decades would probably not be so eventful as in OGL, and the main religion of the Hittites of Tarhantism would find forcefully a lot of adoption. I think Anatolia, Armenia, Greece and Egypt would be very, very suited for this. The Italic people would perhaps prefer the Carthaginians, as they wouldn't care for religion at all, but at the end they would quickly fall under the Gauls. The Gauls would also continue their expansion until the Rhine, only to be beaten and pushed back by the Germanics, while Carthage would influence Britain a lot and even manage to take control of it. West Africa as well as the Saharan trade routes would all be under their control. Gaul would get money of it, as they would force Carthage to pay tributes, and the Hittites might ask for the same, or maybe not. Goods from India and China would gain more popularity, and with that, control over Persia would become important, and ideas of Buddhism could be exported until the Balkans, for instance, or Egypt and the Middle East, of course. Crimea would at one point also be influenced by the Hittites. With the warmer and more humid climate, the Gauls would export wine and many other products from Italy, while Carthage could use it to their advantage and make more money again with it. They would now be able to populate Britain. but give up on the Sahara trade route, as the Sahara would just get too hot for them, and thus they would focus again more in the north. Ireland would be ignored except for one or two main trade ports, and after gaining control over Persia, the Hittites would now get parts of Arabia. As Carthage would pay less to the Gauls and the Hittites, they would face a coalition of both powers and losing many territories in Italy, and losing also probably Sicily, and losing parts of North Africa and northern Iberia. With the warmer climate, the troops of Gaul could easily invade Carthage because the ice melted in the Pyrenees. Moreover, Gaul would probably, after knowing about the silver in Iberia, intend to totally annex it into their realm, and while they would do so, the Hittites would take advantage by taking almost all of North Africa. Post-Carthaginian states would exist in Britain and in West Africa. These would expand all around Britain, Ireland, the Faroe Islands, Iceland, or in Madeira, the Canary Islands, Cape Verde, Senegal, and the Gambias, respectively. In other words, Gaul would manage to overtake the Hittite parts of Italy too, and they would be almost the same size as Western Rome, while the Hittites would roughly have the double size of Eastern Rome during the first year of the division. The Hittites would now face different enemies from Central Asia, but beat them yet again by adapting their military strategy. In the following years, the Huns would push the Germanic people, who would plunder the Balkans, but decide to set for Italy or Carthago, where they heard that there was a lot of money, there were unlimited richnesses, but only to find out that Carthage already fell for many years. Chaos in Gaul would not cease to end, and many smaller Germanic kingdoms would be founded: an alternate Visigoth kingdom, an alternate Frankish kingdom, an alternate Ostrogoth kingdom. Remnants of Gaul would probably be some type of Celtic successor state, and you would also have probably some Germanic who would actually try to go into this part that used to be Carthago. The southern post-Carthaginian states could unite and would, with the Vandals, take some ports, promise them a lot of money, and even take some territories back. The Hittites would, during the invasion from the Huns, the Gepids, the Avars in the Balkans, lose a lot of their possessions, and probably the Bulgarians at the end, they would manage to take most of it, and then Hittito-Greco kingdom, let's say, would gain independence, while Persia would fall to the Hephthalites, or the White Huns as they were called. We are now in an alternate year of 500 CE, or just 500. Northern Carthage or Punic Britain would control all of the North Sea and have trade outposts in Scandinavia and even until the Baltics, where they would get a lot of amber. This would alter the Vikings, probably just butterfly them away. Russian history would be changed a lot, and probably the Baltics, they would get some Punic influence in one way or another. The climate would change and drive more people out of their homelands, such as the Arabs, who would invade and set up different Arabic kingdoms, just as the Germanic people did. Anatolia, Syria, and the Caucasus remained untouched. Thanks to the Arabs, the South Carthaginians could possibly get their former possessions back, and they would pay them a lot of money in doing so. Afterwards, Iberia would face the same chaos as in OTL, and the South Carthaginians would retake Iberia as well for some isolated Visigothic kingdoms who would just stay around in the northern parts of today's Spain. The Arabs would storm into Persia until India, creating a lot of chaos. The Slavs would invade and advance well into Germania, the Balkans, try to beat the Hittites in Anatolia, but ultimately they would fail to just settle into Anatolia, and Bulgaria would control the whole of the Balkans. Big Slavic kingdoms would be established a Punic Baltic trade empire would exist around the Baltics, Finland and North Sweden, while an alternate Kievan Rus influenced by the northern Carthage would exist as well. City-states in Scandinavia started to flourish as well. The Slavic pressure on the continent would lead many Germanic tribes to flee to Britain, trying to invade it, or actually they would just become really absorbed by this pre-Celtic Punic culture or alternate British culture. France would probably end up being divided with a strong southern Celtic kingdom, descendants of the Gauls, who had managed to conquer a lot back, while the north, together with the lowlands, would be Germanic. This alternate Frankish empire would, however, fail, given the fact that northern Carthage and Post-Gaul would be their enemies. After the Arabic kingdoms would face troubles, the Hittites would again once more expand and share borders with Egypt and an alternate Gujara in the middle of Persia. Gujara was an Indian kingdom. Bulgaria would fall under Hittite rule. The Ostrogoths would be split between South Carthage and Post-Gaul, and the Balkans would be split among the Hungarians and the Hittites. The Hittites could also try to do the same as China did with the Mongols and conquer several areas in Arabia. Speaking of the Mongols, they would still devastate pretty much a lot. Eastern Europe would become unrecognizable, and probably a Western Slavic country would be able to expand continuously for 600 years, just like Russia. The trade system would be altered, and thus contacts with Punic Britain would just be cut. While this would happen, Punic Britain could actually go on to Newfoundland, for instance, or Canada, and settle colonies in there, while southern Carthage, or let's just call it right now Neo-Carthage, they would go deeper into Africa. The Hittites would again face troubles, but not fall, as the Mongols were too much centered around one figure. Moreover, most territories were so Hittitized, or let's say they were very much part of the Hittite culture, that these territories would rather go back to the Hittites than become independent or just ruled by a descendant of a Mongol. With the Mongols coming and annoying the Hittites, they would also lose their parts of Egypt to Neo-Carthage, and later on there would be a full-blown war between the Hittites and Neo-Carthage. The Neo-Carthaginians lose on land but win in the sea. More damage has been done to the Hittites, but they were able to take Egypt back and would have trade ships from Egypt to the Horn of Africa, around Arabia, Persia to India, and they would probably later on expand way beyond. Fast forward, we will probably have very resistant Native American states in Northern America, with some Punic British colonies, most likely Newfoundland, will become integral part of Punic Britain. Neo-Carthage would probably dominate western, northwestern Africa, as well as southern Africa, all of Iberia, part of Brazil as well. The Hittites will manage to have the Balkans, Italy, Egypt, Arabia, Persia, Anatolia, the Caucasus, and some trade outposts in India, all of Sri Lanka and colonies in Indonesia, as well as Australia and parts of Oceania. Post-Gaul will be in the same position as Gaul during the start of the Germanic invasion, and they will have small Germanic states as a buffer zone between them and the massive Slavic kingdom that might actually replace Russia in this ATL. Scandinavia would be more Punic and also more Slavic, while the Baltic region would be Punic pre-Celtic, and of course Baltic mixed culture in a way, yeah. India would be the loser of this scenario, as many more invasions would make a detour to India rather than continuing through Persia and Anatolia and then Balkans. China remains almost unaffected, and Japan would probably have almost no Western influence at all and have their own way, but they would still exist and become a very, very competent power. South America would be dominated by an Incan successor state, while Mexico would probably try to reverse the rule of the Aztecs, and they would ask someone like Carthage to help them, and they would agree to do it, but they would also ask to have some trade outposts in Mexico or Yucatan, for instance. The writing system would be very different, as it would most likely be based on the Phoenician alphabet and the Hittite cuneiform. The Hittite language would be spread into Persia, Arabia, Egypt, and parts of Africa, as well as the Balkans, while Punic would be spoken in Northern Africa, Western Africa, Iberia, Britain, Ireland, parts of the Americas too, especially in the north, and have a vast influence in Scandinavia, the Baltics, and a little bit over the Slavic population as well. Ideologies would be heavily based on mercantilism, capitalism, and thalassocracy, while on the other hand, it will be that there is some type of nationalism within the Hittite Empire. I think that ideologies fighting on behalf of oppressed people would especially grow in India, for instance. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Althistory.